Dignāga's Apoha theory, a reassessment. K. Kataoka. Research background. My foray into the study of Apoha, exclusion, theory arose not from an inherent interest in the concept itself, but rather as an integral part of my work on Janta's Nyamanjari, specifically through the critical edition, Kataoka 2008, and translation, Kataoka 2012b, of the text. Janta's critique of Apoha, attributed to Kumarila, 1, necessitates a thorough examination of not only Kumarila's Slokavartika, Apoha chapter, Hattori 1973-1975, but also, crucially, Dignāga's Pramasamukya, chapter 5, Apoha chapter, Hattori 1982. Fortunately, the recent online publication of O. Pin's doctoral dissertation, Pin 2009-2, on Dignāga's relevant chapter has profoundly transformed the available resources for this research, enabling a more accurate understanding based on a reliable Sanskrit text and incorporating the latest scholarly insights. 3. Pin's dissertation, likely stimulating renewed scholarly attention to Apoha theory. 4, has led to a surge in its study. A collection of essays from a 2006 Lausanne workshop was published in 2011 under the apt title Apoha, Sidderitz et al. 2011. Furthermore, a workshop utilizing my critical editions, Kataoka 2008-2009, was held at the IKGA of the Austrian Academy of Sciences from April 16 to 20, 2012. 5. Kumarila's critique, and ontological framing. Kumarila's criticisms, though varied, primarily framed Dignāga's Apoha as an ontological non-existence, negation, then questioned the existential ground for this non-existence. Is it a unique particular, a subtype like a brindled cow, or a collection of 6? Kumarila argues that the ultimate real basis for not-cow, a mutual exclusion, anyonayabhava, must be the universal cowness. Dignāga himself expresses exclusion as the non-existence of other things, PSV 5.44 ABC, at Mantarabhava, 7, so Kumarila's critique, positing Apoha as non-existence, is not entirely misdirected. Kumarila's central inquiry was the relationship between the exclusion of others as non-existence and its underlying reality. 8. However, Kumarila's line of attack, exemplified by his argument that the non-existence of not-cow must presuppose the existence of cowness, just as the non-existence of yogurt presupposes milk, clearly deviates from Dignāga's own conceptualization. Unlike Tarmakiri, Dignāga did not seem particularly concerned with the connection between unique particulars and common features, the non-existence of X. His fundamental view of reality was that it possessed diverse aspects, parts, including unique particulars and various common features. Without delving deeper, 9, these common features, like those in a dream, were conceptually constructed and could, as Dharmadhara imagined. 10, float without any underlying basis. Kumarila's critique is predicated on his own theory of non-existence. Dignāga, on the other hand, describes Apoha theory from a semantic perspective, without presupposing a specific ontology, i.e., operating on the common-sense ontology largely accepted by the Vaiyakas, and criticizes other theories as inferior. 11. It appeared to me that Kumarila's critique, particularly in its opening sections, v. Apoha 1-41, rigorously challenged Dignāga's semantics from Kumarila's unique ontological perspective, rather than critiquing Dignāga's theory itself from a semantic or epistemological viewpoint. Kumarila's method of ontological reframing is similarly evident in his questions concerning the nature of the other that is to be excluded in its entirety. Is it an individual, a collection, or a commonality? 12. And what precisely constitutes that which is qualified by the exclusion of others? Is it an individual, a commonality, and if a commonality, is it a universal as an existent commonality, Apoha as a non-existent commonality, or a relation? 13. The final question is Kumarila's direct redirection of Dignāga's critique of realism back to Dignāga himself. However, as previously stated, for Dignāga, Apoha, as the exclusion of others, is a non-existent and should not be subjected to such realist inquiries. Moreover, we should note that Kumarila, to suggest a parallel structure with the possessor of a universal, Tadvat/Jatamat, succinctly rephrases what Dignāga himself termed existences/objects qualified by the negation/exclusion of other meanings as that which has Apoha, apahabit. 14. Towards a benevolent reading of Dignāga's intent. So, how can we grasp the core of Dignāga's Apoha theory when read benevolently, in alignment with his own intentions? Naturally, I have focused on the parallel structure between the understanding of word meaning and inference. 15, as highlighted by W. Harada's series of works. Specifically, I have concentrated on the apprehension of pervasion, vyapti, and the apprehension of word meaning relation, Kataoka 2014a, 2014b. Dignāga himself declares at the beginning of that Apoha chapter that words function in the same way as the inferential sign of being produced, takatva, which proves impermanence. 16. Inference always involves the apprehension of pervasion, that is, to infer fire from smoke, one must have previously learned the pervasion relation where there is smoke, there is invariably fire. Naturally, the apprehension of word-meaning relation should also involve a similar process of relational apprehension, akin to apprehending pervasion. I have previously written a paper tracing the development of various theories concerning the apprehension of pervasion, Kataoka 2003. While Katsura 1986 comprehensively covered the period before Tarmakiri, my work aimed to trace subsequent developments. My insistence on pervasion relation stems from this background. What, then, was Dignāga's own theory of pervasion apprehension? Naturally, it became necessary to examine not only the Apoha chapter but also other chapters related to inference. I learned much from H. Kitagawa's diligent work, Kitagawa 1965. Fortunately, H. Lasik, responsible for the critical edition of Promise-Amukia Chapter 2, and S. Katsura, responsible for Chapters 3 and 4, began publishing several materials, e.g., Katsura 2004, Lasik 2009, based on their PS manuscript research. During my stay in Vienna, 2004 to 2005, H. Krasser and my former colleague H. Lasik provided me with relevant materials. Katsura also shared unpublished materials through research workshops at Rokoko University. In this way, I was able to verify, from another angle and based on the Sanskrit original, Dignāga's discussions on relational apprehension and word-meaning acquisition in Apoha theory, particularly through the debate on negative concomitants, Vyatarika, in inference. Furthermore, to understand Dignāga's original, or close to original, concept of pervasion prior to the advent of Tarmakiri, i.e., before the introduction of the concept of Svabhava Pratibandha, the image of Dignāga inferred from Kumarila's critique serves as the most compelling documentary evidence, Kataoka 2015. My view, centered on not having been seen, Adarsana, 17, as unexperienced, e.g., Kataoka 2014a, largely aligns with Katsura's understanding, e.g., Katsura 1986, 1998, 18. However, we differ on the evaluation of positive concomitants, which Dignāga partially acknowledges, 19. I have discussed this separately in Kataoka 2015. In the apprehension of necessary relation, negative concomitants plays a decisive role. Dignāga's partial acknowledgement of positive concomitants, in my view, is not because it contributes to relational apprehension, but rather to a posteriori exclude a pseudo-reason, traditionally not recognized as a valid inferential sign, known as the uncommon, inconclusive reason, asdranaitika, a reason that possesses negative concomitants but entirely lacks positive concomitants. 20. This is corroborated by Dignāga's own statement, only through negative concomitants, PSV 5.35. Vyatirekamukaneva, or only clearly excludes positive concomitants. Positive concomitants cannot serve as the door, dvara, through which words denote meaning. 21. Instead, words denote meaning solely through negative concomitants. If positive concomitants played any significant role in relational apprehension, Dignāga's Apoha theory would fundamentally collapse. This is because, in the semantic domain of parakalpita, conceptually constructed, there is no positive existent as a relatum that should be positively related generally. 22. There is only non-existence, the exclusion of others. 23. Comparing Dignāga's thesis with opposing views. Following the parallel structure with inference, focusing on the apprehension of pervasion and word-meaning acquisition, I then turned my attention to Dignāga's comparison of his own theory with opposing views, Kataoka 2016b. Dignāga's exclusion of others fulfills the role of a universal in realist theories, that is, it acts as a common feature. Dignāga himself explicitly states that the characteristics of a universal as a common feature, being single, being permanent, and being wholly present in every individual instance, are met only by the exclusion of others. 24. Dignāga replaces the real universal with the non-existent exclusion of others. He then proposes his own exclusion possessor theory, the theory that word meaning is qualified by exclusion. 25. In opposition to the universal possessor theory, which holds the highest theoretical advantage among other schools. So, in what respects does Dignāga's theory surpass the universal possessor theory? The question I encountered was the problem of the inclusion and implication of superordinate and subordinate word meanings, Katsura 1979, 26. Why, in the universal possessor theory, does existent not include or imply pot, whereas in the exclusion possessor theory, existent does? Why, in the exclusion possessor theory, is the semantic domain broad, encompassing subordinate and superordinate meanings, while in the universal possessor theory, the semantic domain is limited, not encompassing such meanings? From my perspective, accustomed to the hierarchy of universals and realism, knowableness, existence, substanceness, earthiness, potness, 27, it seemed unproblematic for existence to imply substance or pot. Why, then, could Dignāga criticize the realist position? This question had not been raised in prior research. Through careful scrutiny of Dignāga's own descriptions, I discovered the concept of non-exclusion, PS 5.18b, Anapahana. A superordinate meaning encompasses a subordinate meaning. Specifically, the general germ existent encompasses the subordinate meaning substance and the even more subordinate meaning pot. The basis for this is the non-exclusion of a substance or a pot by the word existent. Because it is not excluded, it is encompassed and can be implied. Returning to the context of relational apprehension, this means that superordinate and subordinate meanings, like the word's proper meaning itself, are not excluded. Conversely, in the universal possessor theory, a word is related only to its proper meaning, not to anything else. This reveals that positive relations are specific, while negative relations are unspecific in general. For convenience, I termed negative and passive relations based on negative concomitants weak relations. Conversely, I called positive and active relations based on positive concomitants strong relations. Similarly, I designated the corresponding denotation process as weak denotation and strong denotation, Kataoka 2016c. Indeed, in PSSV 5.18, Dignāga states, this is not said because it is denoted, but rather because it is not excluded, natat uktamabhid hayatvat, kitar hayana pahanat, thereby distinguishing between strong and weak denotations, where the latter is referred to as non-exclusion. For him, the expression ubi-square root dha can carry the nuance of a strong denotation. Re-examining the beginning of the Pramasa with this perspective, one notices that Dignāga states, the word, reveals by means of the exclusion of other meanings, abda, arthantarabhayavokedana diotayati, deliberately using diotayati instead of ubi-square root dha or other similar terms, and rephrasing the expression, the word, speaks, bait, from PS 5.1. Revealing, diotayati, is known in grammar as an expression contrasted with denoting, ubi-square root dha. That is, the prefix pra used in pra-square root sta, to stand/remain in front to depart, does not denote its own meaning, but rather serves to bring out a meaning already inherent in the verbal root sta, to stand/remain. In other words, while sta might ordinarily seem to mean only to remain, the meaning of to set out was actually inherent within it, and this was brought forth by pra-28. This aligns with Dignāga's view of reality. According to Dignāga, various aspects of reality are brought forth through the exclusion of others. These manifold aspects, hidden within reality, are revealed through the exclusion of others. Therefore, it is plausible that Dignāga uses the term reveals to convey what I refer to as weak denotation. When viewed through the lens of weak and strong relations, and weak and strong denotations, the superiority Dignāga perceives between his own exclusion possessor theory and the opposing universal possessor theory becomes clear. In this paper, with this problem in mind, I will once again trace the outline of Dignāga's Apoha theory, focusing on sections where the Sanskrit textual situation is relatively robust. 29. Apoha as a theory of word meaning. The nominal action noun apoha derives from the verbal root apa-square root meaning to push aside, and refers to the act of exclusion. Dignāga's semantic theory posits that the meaning of a word, such as cow, is the exclusion of non-cows, or rather, that which is qualified by the exclusion of non-cows. 30. Semantics here refers to the discussion of word meaning. According to the classification method of the Ba school of MMA with Macron essay with Macron, a school of scriptural hermeneutics, discussions concerning linguistic comprehension can be organized into three categories: phonology, word meaning, and sentence meaning. Phonology, understanding a word, /ga/ from phonemes, g-o. Word meaning, understanding meaning, counus, from a word, /ga/. Sentence meaning, understanding sentence meaning, bringing a cow, from word meanings, counus, bringing. Different schools propose different views for each of these three levels. 31. The second discussion, that of word meaning, is the context in which Apoha theory is situated. The Buddhist Apoha theory, or theory of exclusion, can thus be provisionally characterized as the Buddhist theory of word meaning. 32. Specifically, it is a theory that explains how a cow is understood from the word cow. 33. The place of Apoha cognition as a conceptual construction. When grasping Dignāga's Apoha theory, it is crucial first to clarify the position of word meaning comprehension within the various types of cognition. To that end, let us re-examine the problem within the broader framework of the Yogacara school's theory of three natures. While one could narrowly conceive of the problem within the dichotomy of perception and inference, as the Sautrantikas do, we will adopt a broader perspective here. According to the Yogacara view, cognitions are broadly classified, from highest to lowest, as the cognition of a Buddha, the perception of ordinary individuals, and conceptual constructions. These correspond to emptiness, unique particulars, unburdened by conceptualization or language, and common features, respectively. Unique particulars, which are objects of perception, are paratantra, dependent on others, meaning they are existence, vastu, on the causal chain that arise based on others. They are also called dravyasat, substantially existent. Specifically, they are individual objects that arise and perish in every moment. They are akin to particulars or individuals in realism, but they differ in that they are momentary, not enduring for a period. On the other hand, common features, which are objects of conceptual construction, are parakalpita, conceptually constructed. They are also called prajnaptisat, existent by designation, or saptisat, conventionally existent. They are products of imagination tied to language, also referred to as fabricated, samarapita. Roughly speaking, the difference between unique particulars and common features is the difference between existing, sat, and not existing, asat. As Tarmakirti would later formulate, what exists is that which has effective causal power, specifically, that which produces a cognition bearing a similar image. This definition reframes what was understood as a result of dependence on others in terms of causality, now from the perspective of what produces, with the addition of an epistemological viewpoint. The actual content of this common feature is the exclusion of others, Apoha. That is, while cowness, common to individual cows, is a real universal in universal realism, for Dignāga, the exclusion of non-cows plays the role of commonality. Buddha's cognition targets parinipana, perfectly accomplished nature, and paramarthasat, ultimately existent, emptiness. Perception targets paratantra, dependent on others, and dravyasat, substantially existent, unique particulars. Conceptual construction targets parakalpita, conceptually constructed, and prajnaptisat, conventionally existent/worldly existent, common features, apoha. Comprehension of word meaning is inferential cognition. The comprehension of word meaning is counted as one of the two types of valid cognition, perception and inference. However, inferential cognition is inferior to perception, which is non-conceptual, in that it is conceptual. Nevertheless, inferential cognition, though conceptual, is considered the highest among conceptual cognitions as a valid cognition. Dignāga explicitly identifies word meaning comprehension as inferential cognition, thus reducing it to inferential cognition. Although word meaning comprehension, being a conceptual construction, fabrication, is intrinsically erroneous in mistaking what is not an object, a common feature, for an object, a unique particular, and thus inferior to perception, which correctly apprehends unique particulars, it is distinguished from mere conventional errors, e.g., mistaking mother of pearl for silver, dreams. Furthermore, while common features, the objects of conceptual cognition, are non-existent, asat, in contrast to substantially existent things, they are distinguished from absolute non-existence, adiantasat, such as a rabbit's horn or a skyflower. Common features, though not substantially existent, appear in cognition, thus distinguishing them from things that do not appear in the mind, like skyflowers. If we also include perceptual judgment, which is not considered a valid cognition as it does not convey new information, as discussed by Tarmakirti, three types of conceptual cognitions can be distinguished. Apoha cognition is classified as inferential cognition, which is a valid cognition. For more details on the classification of conceptual cognitions, refer to Nakasuka 2014, 2015a, 2015b. Conceptual cognition. 3.1 Inferential cognition, including word meaning comprehension. 3.2 Perceptual judgment, a conceptual judgment that is a cow that follows the perception of a cow. 3.3 Error, mistaking mother of pearl for silver, cognitions in a dream state. Implications of word meaning comprehension as inferential cognition. To understand word meaning comprehension as undergoing the same process as inferring fire from smoke implies that the cognitive processes required for inference are directly applicable to word meaning comprehension. Therefore, just as in inference, it is necessary to have previously learned the pervasion relation smoke has been seen only where there is fire, so too in word meaning comprehension, it is necessary to grasp the relation the word cow has been seen to apply only to cows. In this process, since Buddhism denies real universals, it becomes impossible to directly connect positive existence like fireness and smokeness, or cowness, and the word cow. If universal realism were assumed, the task of relating would be complete by simply connecting the universal cowness with the word cow. However, Dignāga, who does not admit a convenient universal from the outset, cannot allow this. That is, the path to discovering a universal relation between fireness and smokeness by repeatedly observing the coexistence of both relata as positive concomitants. Smoke happens to be where there is fire, which is the precondition for grasping pervasion involving necessity. Smoke is only where there is fire, is fundamentally blocked. Therefore, unlike Kumarila of the MMA with Macron school, repeated experience of observing coexistence through positive concomitants is impossible in Apoha theory. As a result, Apoha theory adopts the strategy of establishing pervasion through negative concomitants. If X is not present, Y is never present. That is, just as smoke has not been seen where there is no fire, so too, through not having been seen, Adarsana, that the word cow has not been seen to apply to non-cows, negative concomitants is established. and by means of this negative concomitance, a universal pervasion relation or word-meaning relation is established. Thus, there is a fundamental difference between realism and Apoha theory regarding whether relation establishment is positive or negative. This difference leads to a distinction between whether the relations formed are strong or weak. Simply put, in Apoha theory, the two relata connected are not actively chosen relata but rather remainders after others have been excluded. The remaining entities that emerge after exclusion are merely passively related. The relata in realism and those in Apoha theory are, so to speak, analogous to a couple who are strongly attracted to each other versus a couple who are left over after others have been chosen. Consequently, in the case of strong attraction, the range of chosen relata is specific and pinpointed. Only those two specifically connected entities are relata. On the other hand, in the case of leftovers, the range of chosen relata is unspecific, general, and broad. This is convenient for explaining the generality of word meaning, the aspect of common features. It is also key to explaining the listener's expectation and doubt regarding subordinate meanings when hearing the word cow, discussed later. Dignāga himself explains that something is encompassed as a word meaning based on non-exclusion. That is, it remains as a word meaning precisely because it was not excluded. Furthermore, just as the word meaning is essentially qualified by the exclusion of others, the word cow itself, in Dignāga's view, is also qualified by the exclusion of others, as a remainder excluded from other words. The difference in the view of relations between realism and Apoha theory will surface as the presence or absence of the inclusion of superordinate and subordinate word meanings, discussed later. Opposing theories to Apoha. In establishing Apoha theory, Dignāga criticized four opposing theories: the particulars theory, the universals theory, the relation theory, and the universal possessor theory. 34. Dignāga's own theory is the exclusion possessor theory, specifically, the theory that what is understood from cow is that which is qualified by the exclusion of non-cows. Particulars theory, cow refers to a specific individual cow, e.g., cow Mary, as a particular. Universals theory, cow refers to cowness. Relation theory, cow refers to the relation with cowness. Universal possessor theory, cow refers to that which possesses cowness. Exclusion possessor theory, cow refers to that which possesses the exclusion of non-cows. Dignāga's descriptive stance is that his own Apoha theory, exclusion possessor theory, can better explain various linguistic phenomena than any of the enemy theories, 1-4. That is, Dignāga's method of criticizing opposing theories is to argue that each of them suffers from faults and that they cannot explain certain linguistic phenomena. Linguistic phenomena to be explained. Dignāga has 5 linguistic phenomena in mind that a theory of language should explain. 35. Possibility of relation. It is possible to establish a relation between a word and its meaning, acquisition of word-meaning relations. Non-deviation from proper meaning. A word, having acquired a relation to a certain meaning, its proper meaning, does not deviate from that proper meaning when applied, nor does it give rise to doubt. Sharing of identical referent. 2 words, such as existent and substance, or existent and pot, can refer to the same object. Inclusion/encompassment of subordinate meaning by direct function. Existent directly encompasses substance or pot, which are subordinate meanings of existent thing. Primary meaning by direct function. Existent directly means existent thing as its primary meaning, without any intervening factors like existence. As Dignāga argues, particulars do not satisfy the possibility of relation, A1, and non-deviation from proper meaning, A2, but they do satisfy the sharing of identical referent, i.e., coreference, A3. On the other hand, universals and relations satisfy the former, B1, B2, but not the latter, B3. The universal possessor theory can explain all 3 phenomena, C1, C2, C3. Dignāga himself adheres to the exclusion possessor theory, which in that respect has a similar structure to the universal possessor theory. However, the universal possessor theory does not satisfy the inclusion of subordinate meaning, C4, and primary meaning, C5. Dignāga does not discuss the inclusion and primary meaning for particulars, universals, or relations, 4, A5, B4, B5, as they are irrelevant. Only Dignāga's exclusion possessor theory can explain all 5 phenomena. 36. A. Particulars. B. Universals/relations. C. Universal possessor. 1. Possibility of relation. 2. Non-deviation. 3. Sharing identical referent. 4. Inclusion. 5. Primary meaning. Possibility of relation. The simplest method for connecting the word cow with the object cow is to relate the word cow individually to each and every particular cow. However, it is evident that this is impossible. Dignāga explains the reason: since particulars are enumerable, it is impossible to relate them to words. 37. What he has in mind here is the causal relationship between singularity and the possibility of relation. That is, when a word meaning possesses singularity, it becomes possible to establish a relation between the word and its meaning. Conversely, if word meanings are enumerable, relation becomes impossible. Since particulars are enumerable, relation is impossible. Specifically, it is impossible to relate cow to each of the innumerable individual cows. On the other hand, if universals are admitted, i.e., if one adheres to the universals theory, relation theory, or universal possessor theory, then it becomes possible to establish a relation with the single entity of cowness. In that respect, Apoha theory, which posits a single commonality, the exclusion of non-cows, in place of cowness, is on par. Where, then, lies the superiority of Apoha theory? In universal realism, pervasion relationships are said to be learned through positive concomitance. That is, by repeatedly experiencing the coexistence smoke happens to be where there is fire, the pervasion relationship smoke is only where there is fire is apprehended. Similarly, in the case of word-meaning relations, it should be learned positively, as the word cow is applied only to cows. 38. Here, cowness and cow as positive existence are presupposed, and the act of connecting them in a single step ensures the possibility of relation. In contrast, in Apoha theory, as mentioned, the pervasion relation is said to be learned through negative concomitance. That is, a necessary relation is apprehended through not having been seen until now. Dignāga states, 39, conversely, regarding the absence of what is equal, atulya, 40, even if there is enumerability, it is possible to declare non-application simply by not having been seen. It is easy to say that one has never encountered a single counterexample. Furthermore, in the case of linguistic usage, it is socially evident that the word cow is never applied to the non-existence of a cow, as a correct usage. Dignāga says, and it is for this very reason that inferring by excluding, what is not the proper meaning, by not having been seen elsewhere than in its own relatum, is called the denotation of its own meaning. 41. Here, the function of denotation is identified with inference. Weak denotation, which consists of non-exclusion, is rephrased as inference by the exclusion of others. The two opposing theories that take a possessor as word meaning have a crucial difference: the strong relation establishment that directly and positively connects a word and its meaning, and the weak relation establishment where the remaining word meanings, excluded from other word meanings, remain as what is not excluded. This difference will manifest as the possibility or impossibility of including subordinate and superordinate word meanings in phenomenon 4, discussed later. Non-deviation from proper meaning. Even if a relation between innumerable particulars and a word were established, the listener would not know which of the innumerable relations was intended. That is, the word meaning, the proper meaning of the word, would not be uniquely determined, becoming inconclusive, anakanta, and the mind would wander, periplavate. Dignāga states, because of deviation, there would be doubt, not denotation. 42. For instance, upon hearing the word existent, a definite cognition, niskaya, of meaning would not arise, only doubt, saya, would remain: is it a substance, a quality, or a motion? Here, Dignāga has in mind the causal relationship between singularity and deviation, vyabhikara/inconclusiveness, anakanta. That is, because a word meaning is singular, there is no deviation or inconclusiveness, which enables determination and definitive denotation. Conversely, if word meanings are innumerable, there is deviation and inconclusiveness, leading to uncertainty and lingering doubt. Here, deviation is used in the sense of inconclusiveness, wandering. Dignāga later also uses the phrase non-deviation from its own meaning, svarthavayabhikara. As is evident from this, the definiteness of being uniquely determined as its own meaning, ekantata, is intended by the expression non-deviation. In the case of cow, for example, doubt would arise as to whether it refers to cow Mary, cow Susie, or some other cow, because there are innumerable relations. Similar to the discussion of the possibility of relation, if universals are admitted, the fault of deviation from proper meaning does not arise. That is, from existence, or a relation to existence, or that which is qualified by existence, is correctly understood. However, as we saw above, if strong relations are presupposed, it leads to the problem that no expectation for subordinate meanings, which are not related, arises. The expectation mentioned here is also the inverse of doubt. That is, after understanding existence from the word existent, the further expectation/doubt, is it a substance, a quality, or a motion, cannot be explained by strong relation establishment. This is because, if strong relation establishment is admitted, those meanings are not encompassed in a pinpointed way as word meanings, so the emergence of expectation/doubt cannot be explained. This is because no doubt can arise about something whose relation has not been seen. 43. Sharing of identical referent in particulars. A3. When one says existent substance, it is easy to explain in the particulars theory that both words, existent and substance, refer to the same object. Since both refer to particulars, their reference can be identical. As the grammarian Reassessment quoted in PSV 5.2 Candelas says, it is well known that in the case of two substance words, both have the same referent. 44. Existent refers to existent things, and substance limits the word meaning to substance, which is a part of it. Dignāga states, after all particulars are exhaustively denoted, for the sake of limitation, there are specific words. 45. The possibility of a non-distinct expression, bedarther apthakriti, i.e., an appositional expression, between the general word existent and the specific word, vyabda, i.e., subordinate word substance, is due to the identical referent.
Existe égale substance.
Within the two-tiered structure of substratum, i.e., property bearer and property, the particulars theory refers only to particulars on the first tier, so there is no discrepancy between the first and second tiers, unlike the universals theory, discussed later, which posits universals on the second tier. Therefore, it can successfully explain expressions of shared identical referent in apposition, such as existent substance. Conversely, if the referents are different, an appositional non-distinct expression does not hold. It would take a distinct expression, the kriti, i.e., a different case expression, like black of sesame, tilajaka, or king's servant, rajapurua. As Bartharius verse says, in the case of two words denoting property and substratum, their case endings invariably differ. 46. Black. Of. Sesame. Sharing of identical referent in universals and relations. B3. Regarding the first two linguistic phenomena, possibility of relation, non-deviation from proper meaning, the universals and relation theories are advantageous. However, they cannot explain the third linguistic phenomenon, the sharing of identical referent. This is because by introducing the universal as a property, a two-tiered structure of property and substratum, guagin, arises, leading to a vertical discrepancy in the reference. As we have already seen, in the case of particulars, it is a single-tiered structure consisting only of substances, so there was no problem with both words referring to the same object. On the other hand, if a universal is posited above individual particulars, it creates a two-tiered structure, leading to a discrepancy in what both words existent and substance refer to. Existent refers to existence, or a relation to existence. However, existence, or a relation to existence, is not identical to substance. This is because existence or a relation is not a substance, rather, existence or a relation is on substance. Therefore, it should take a different case expression, existent of substance, rather than an appositional expression, existent substance. Existent existence. Of. Substance. Similarly, existent quality should take the different case expression existent of quality. Dignāga states, for existence or a relation to it is not a substance or a quality, rather, it belongs to a substance or a quality. 47. Furthermore, although Dignāga does not describe it this way, if we consider it strictly, in the universals theory, not only the word existent but also the word substance should be considered to refer to a universal. That is, it should be considered to refer to substanceness rather than substance. However, even if we consider it this way, the referents remain different. This is because existence and substanceness are completely distinct universals. Therefore, the sharing of identical referent does not hold. 48.
Existent not equal to substance.
Denotation of relation, B3 foot. Dignāga discusses the denotation of relation in PSV 5.3. As we have seen, relation is the relation between two relata, the universal and the particular. That is, the relation theory posits that existent refers to the relation between existence and the particular. However, common sense suggests that what existent directly refers to is either existence or the particular existent thing. The word existent is not used to intend a relation that is merely a property of the relatum. That is, existent directly refers to the relatum, not directly to a property of the relatum. Dignāga states, therefore, it has been suggested, on the assumption that relation is denoted as a property of the relatum. However, there is no word that denotes relation as its own attribute. 49. Specifically in the current context, this means that existent directly denotes existence, and does not directly refer to relation, which is a property of existence. Here, Dignāga seems to have in mind the problem of directness, that words directly operate on their reference, which will also be an issue later. In other words, existent refers to relation, which is a property, subordinate to the relatum, only indirectly.
Attribut, relation. Existe l'existence, relatum.
Linguistic phenomena and explanatory principles. Above, we have examined the linguistic phenomena to be explained for particulars, universals, and relations. It is confirmed that the characteristic of singularity functions as the explanatory principle for the possibility of relation and non-deviation from proper meaning. Furthermore, the sharing of identical referent is made possible by a single-tiered structure in which both words denote a substance. The possibility of relation, in turn, enables the acquisition of word meaning, which then establishes denotation in the context of linguistic usage. On this point, Dignāga later states, nor is there the fault of non-denotation due to the infinitude of particulars. 50. Dignāga was always acutely aware that denotation presupposes relation. Dignāga states, and, without the doorway of relation, a word or an inferential sign cannot convey its own meaning/object. This is because it is impossible to make it understood entirely, as it possesses many properties. 51. 3 linguistic phenomena in the universal possessor theory. The universal possessor theory is capable of explaining all 3 of the linguistic phenomena discussed previously. Dignāga states,
Due to its co-referentiality with particular terms, the possibility of establishing a relation, and its non-deviation, the universal possessor in general, i.e., a mere unrestricted universal possessor, is intended to be denoted PSV 5.4a.52.
Here, the term matra appended to universal possessor signifies mere unrestricted. 53, for example, the word existent refers unspecifically to all that possesses existence. Thus, the first 2 linguistic phenomena are explained. Furthermore, despite being a 2-tiered structure of property and substratum, the sharing of the first tier ensures the explanation of the identical referent. That is, since existent refers to that which possesses existence, existent thing equals substance is effortlessly established at the first tier. Existent existence.
Existe égale substance substance.
Alternatively, if we consider substance also to mean a universal possessor, similar to the above strict interpretation, then existent would refer to a substance possessing existence, and substance would refer to a substance possessing substanceness. In this case, too, both words would share the same referent.
Existe l'existence substance naisse substance. Existe égale substance. Universal possessor vs. Exclusion possessor.
As we've seen, the universal possessor theory can explain all 3 linguistic phenomena, making it the most plausible among the candidates of particulars, universals, relations, and universal possessors. However, Dignāga still criticizes this universal possessor theory. To do so, a principle beyond mere singularity is required. He introduces the principle of direct function, skuti, also referred to as directness, autonomy, or non-dependence on others, svatantratva, svatantria. As is immediately apparent, the universal possessor theory inherently suffers from the weakness of indirectness or dependence on others, asvatantratva, asvatantria. For example, existent refers to that which possesses existence through the universal of existence. Dignāga, on the other hand, posits the exclusion possessor, apohavat, as the word meaning, in opposition to the universal possessor, jatamat. To state the conclusion up front, the principle of direct function leads to the principle of implication/encompassment, where the meaning falls within the scope of the word, thereby enabling the explanation of the sharing of identical reference. In considering the scope of a word, the concept of weak relation establishment becomes influential. Similarly, from direct function, the fact that a word primarily refers to its meaning is explained. Implication in the universal possessor theory, C4. In the example existent pot, when the word existent functions, we consider the range of word meaning that the word definitively operates on. In the universal possessor theory, this would be the entity possessing existence. 54, therefore, pot, which is a subordinate particular of an entity possessing existence, is not definitively understood from the word. Dignāga states, for even in this case the word existent denotes a substance that has only the universal and, its phonetic form, itself as a subordinate element, and not directly, does it denote substance. Therefore, since it does not imply subordinate meanings, such as a pot, which is contained therein, in the substance, and since it does not have that as a subordinate meaning, there is no sharing of identical reference. For, if there is no encompassment, there is no sharing of identical reference, PSV 5.4a, 55. Firstly, existent is directly connected to existence, 1. Through this subordinate element of existence, it indirectly refers to substance, 1, 2. It does not directly function on substance. In other words, it depends on existence. Bearing this dependent indicative relation in mind, Dignāga uses the word implication. That is, the scope of what the word existent implies extends only to substance, and does not reach pot through substance. 2-3. Later, Dignāga describes this fault as the fault of not implying its own subordinate meanings due to dependence on others, Pretentrius Fabhen Kadoa, 56.
Existe une existence. Implication en compasme.
2 substance.
Arthkeepa. 3 pot. It is important to note the difference from meaning-based, indirect, implication, arthkeepa, which Dignāga discusses later in PS 5.11c. The word implication is usually used in the sense of semantic implication. Here too, its original meaning is preserved. That is, the current implication is also used in the sense that the word, through the mediation of existence, makes substance understood. In the current diagram, this is the first stage of implication, 1-2. On the other hand, what Dignāga later calls meaning-based implication refers to the second stage of indirect implication, 2-3, where pot is further implied and understood through substance. However, Dignāga ultimately rejects this indirect implication because it lacks definitiveness. What Dignāga means here when he says that existent does not imply pot is based on the following structure. First, the word existent, by depending on existence, implies a substance possessing existence. This is the extent of the word's meaning. However, it does not definitively convey anything beyond that as word meaning. In other words, the word meaning includes substance, but it does not include a specific particular like a pot. To put it another way, since the word existent does not directly function on substance and depends on existence, it implies substance, but it does not further imply pot as word meaning from there. Encompassment. Dignāga also uses the term vyapti. Jineन्द्ra comments that vyapti making the two terms interchangeable, pin 2015, 224 in 59. It is important to note that this vyapti is not referring to pervasion in the strict sense used in inference, where the place of smoke is pervaded by the place of fire, in this case, a pervasion relation between denoted meanings where a subordinate meaning is pervaded by a superordinate meaning. 57. Instead, it is understood to mean that the word existent encompasses substance but does not encompass pot. When emphasizing the indirectness of the word existent conveying an indirect meaning of a substance possessing existence through the mediating term existence, Dignāga uses the term implication, kepa. When actively highlighting the scope where the word includes substance but not pot, he uses the term encompassment, vyapti. White and sweet. Dignāga refers to the following examples as instances where words do not imply or encompass. For example, white implies / encompasses a white object through the mediation of the quality of whiteness, 1-2. However, it does not imply / encompass a sweet object, 2-3. That is, it does not have that as a subordinate meaning, atadbadatva. White 1 whiteness. 2 white substance. 3 sweet substance. Similarly, existent implies / encompasses that which possesses existence, but it does not imply / encompass a pot. Therefore, it does not have pot as a subordinate meaning. Consequently, the sharing of identical reference, existent equals pot, does not hold. To re-explain in simpler terms, the word white, according to the universal possessor theory, means that which is qualified by whiteness, and does not mean a sweet object. That is, a sweet object is outside the scope of the word. Therefore, a sweet object is not understood from white. Similarly, the word existent means that which is qualified by existence, and does not mean a pot. A pot is outside the scope of the word. Therefore, a pot is not understood from existent, and thus the sharing of identical reference between existent and pot cannot be explained. Contrast with implication in the exclusion possessor theory, D4. Let's consider this in contrast with Dignāga's own exclusion possessor theory. In the universal possessor theory, existent directly denotes existence, 1. Depending on existence, substance, strictly speaking, existent things, is implied, 1-2. Therefore, since existent depends on existence, it implies substance, but it does not imply a pot. Although it might be thought that a pot is indirectly implied from substance, 2-3, this is not definitive, so indirect implication is not recognized as operative.
Existe dénote une existence. Implication en compasme.
2 substance.
Indirect implication. 3 pot. On the other hand, in the exclusion possessor theory, exclusion itself is considered a non-existent, abhava, or a non-substance, adravya, so it is not counted as an intermediary, 0. That is, existent, through the exclusion of the non-existent, directly denotes the existent, 0-1. From there, existent further implies slash encompasses a pot through the existent, 1-2. In the exclusion possessor theory, this encompassment is possible, as mentioned earlier, because the subordinate meaning pot is included, antarbhava, during the acquisition of word meaning. In other words, pot has not been excluded, anapahana.
Existe, dénote, zéro exclusion. Un existe. Implication en compasme, inclusion et non-exclusion.
Two pot.
Thus, in the exclusion possessor theory, the direct function slash non-dependence on others of the word, and the weak relation establishment, make the implication slash encompassment of the subordinate meaning pot possible. Directness and implication. In the discussions above, the explanatory principles and linguistic phenomena Dignāga has in mind are causally related as follows. The word existent, through the exclusion of the non-existent, functions directly on the existent. In doing so, even a pot, which was not excluded during word meaning acquisition, becomes implied slash encompassed. This then establishes the sharing of identical reference in the phrase existent pot. Conversely, if the word existent does not function directly on the existent but instead depends on something else like existence, then existent implies slash encompasses substance, but it does not imply slash encompass a pot. This is because, when a strong relation establishment is presupposed, a pot is not included within the word meaning of existent. Therefore, existent does not encompass a pot, and the sharing of identical reference does not hold. Figurative use in the universal possessor theory, C5. In the universal possessor theory, existent refers to the existent through existence, 1-2. Therefore, it becomes a figurative or secondary usage, upakara. That is, existent does not denote that which possesses existence as its primary meaning, bhutartha.
Existe une existence.
Two existent.
Primary meaning in the exclusion possessor theory, D5. On the other hand, in the exclusion possessor theory, as already stated, existent, by excluding the non-existent, functions directly on the existent. Therefore, existent directly denotes the existent as its primary meaning. Unlike existence, which is a mediating item posited by realism, the exclusion posited by Apoha theory is a non-reality slash non-existence, so it does not become an intermediary that creates indirectness. Existence zero exclusion.
Un existe.
The linguistic phenomenon here is the linguistic fact that a word expresses its meaning primarily, not figuratively. Direct function serves as the principle that enables this. Conversely, if there is dependence on others, the word meaning becomes figurative. Non-exclusion. Why does Dignāga say that existent implies a pot? Regarding Dignāga's choice of vocabulary here, it is necessary to consider its applicability to his own theory and other theories. According to his own exclusion possessor theory, as seen in the expression in PSV 5.1, the term existent, by excluding the non-existent, generally reveals, diotaiati, the existent. In this case, there is a structure where, by excluding others, the word's proper meaning, existent in general, emerges. In that situation, existent reveals its own proper meaning, which is the existent in general. This is denotation, abhidana, in the sense of a determination through non-deviation from its proper meaning. At that time, a pot also falls within the scope of the word. That is, a pot is included, enter-square root bo, within the realm of the existent.
Existe, revéal, zéro exclusion. Un existe. Implication en compasme, inclusion et non-exclusion.
Two pot.
Grasping this situation, Dignāga states that existent implies, kapa, and encompasses, vyapti, a pot. The inclusion, enter-square root bo, of a particular, like a pot, within a general, existent substance, is, according to Dignāga's own explanation, synonymous with non-exclusion, anapahana, PS 5.18b. That is, for Dignāga, when he says existent includes a pot, that includes is intended to mean non-exclusion. While existent produces a definite cognition regarding the existent by means of non-deviation from the word's proper meaning, it produces doubt regarding a pot by including it in the sense of non-exclusion. As will be discussed later, there is doubt regarding subordinate things, and that doubt leads to expectation, which makes qualification possible. In Apoha theory, existent implies slash encompasses a pot in the weak sense of non-exclusion. Strong versus weak theories of denotation. When the word cow signifies the general concept of a cow, realists posit an objective relationship between the word cow and the universal cowness. This is a positive relationship, and denotation is established by learning this relationship positively. This is referred to as the strong theory of denotation. Apoha theorists, on the other hand, believe that cow denotes its proper meaning through the exclusion of non-cows, leading to the non-rejection, aprataikipa, of all cows. The Apoha theorists' denotation is a weak form of denotation. This means that the proper meaning remains in the sense of not being rejected, and a relationship is formed with the word, establishing the denotation. In this case, as seen in the example of existent, the word existent includes a pot, meaning that existent includes a pot and does not exclude it, anapahana, napahate. Therefore, existent encompasses a pot within its scope. That existent denotes the existent and further includes a pot can be explained by this weak sense of denotation, non-rejection. The word existent does not actively select its proper meaning existent but passively selects it as what remains after the exclusion of the non-existent. At that point, the subordinate pot is also included as an implication, remaining potentially, i.e., as an object of doubt. Consequently, it becomes possible to later extract it through expectation and establish a relationship with other word meanings.
Existe zéro exclusion non existe.
Reveals. One existent, proper meaning. Non-exclusion. Two-pot. Implication, encompassment, and non-deviation.
Observing these circumstances, Dignāga's intention in his choice of vocabulary becomes clear. For him, word meaning denotation is a weak denotation, in the sense that the word has not rejected its proper meaning. In short, non-rejection, aprataikipa, is the essence of denotation. When adopting this weak theory of denotation, in the exclusion possessor theory, the definite understanding of the meaning pot from the word existent when accompanied by another word pot ultimately comes about through the implication/encompassment of pot by existent, as well as doubt and expectation. On the other hand, in the universal possessor theory, which adheres to a strong theory of denotation, existent does not imply/encompass a pot, so it cannot lead to the understanding of a pot. In the universal possessor theory, the proper meaning of existent is a substance possessing existence. This is different from a pot. Therefore, existent does not include a pot. Even if indirect implication were considered, it would not be definitive. Thus, existent does not encompass a pot. Conversely, in the exclusion possessor theory, the proper meaning of existent is the existent in general, revealed by the exclusion of the non-existent, which is, so to speak, a remainder that has not been excluded. Since a pot is also included in the existent in general, which is excluded from the non-existent, there is no problem with existent implying/encompassing a pot. That is, existent does not exclude a pot. Therefore, even if existent alone does not definitively denote a pot, when it co-occurs in a phrase like existent pot, there is no problem for the word existent, when accompanied by pot, to lead to a definite understanding of a pot through doubt and expectation. In other words, when the existent in general is understood from the word existent, doubt arises, such as, is it an existent pot or cloth? This leads to the expectation, existent what? Then, by means of the proximate word pot, a definite understanding of an existent pot arises. This process is possible because existent originally implied/encompassed a pot in the sense of not excluding it. This implication/encompassment is based on the Apoha theory's weak theory of denotation. And as already mentioned, denotation presupposes relation. In Apoha theory, relation is established not through positive concomitance but through negative concomitance. Dignāga, as we will see later, is keenly aware that a word does not exclude the meaning of general terms, particular terms, or synonyms, PSV 5.25 Candelas, 58, that is, what the word existent does not exclude, napahate, is not only the subordinate pot but also its own proper meaning existent and even the superordinate knowable object, nea. In other words, it is not just the direct function, backed by the ontology where exclusion is a non-existent/non-substance, that enables implication/encompassment. Non-rejection or non-exclusion is also deeply involved, serving as a core tenet of exclusion semantics. Behind these strong and weak theories of denotation lies a difference in the method of acquiring word-meaning relations. That is, learning through positive concomitance results in the strong denotation based on strong relation establishment, while learning through negative concomitance results in the weak denotation based on non-rejection, which is a weak relation establishment. Determination/doubt and exclusion/contradiction. For Dignāga, what enabled weak denotation was the weak relation establishment based on negative concomitance. This involved the way words function through non-exclusion. Non-exclusion generates determination for superordinate and coordinate meanings, and doubt for subordinate meanings. For example, tree produces determination for earthen thing in tree, but doubt for cherry tree. Here, let's reconfirm the semantic structure Dignāga consistently had in mind when using the terms determination and doubt. It involves the concepts of exclusion, apoha, non-exclusion, and apoha, rejection, prataikipa, non-rejection, aprataikipa, non-contradiction, avarota, and contradiction, viroda. Non-exclusion of proper meaning. First, a word does not reject, pratikipa, or exclude, apoha, its proper meaning. Dignāga states, 59, and it is not proper to reject its own meaning, PSV 5.25 Candelas. 60.
Tri l'exclusion non tri.
Tree. Non-exclusion of superordinate. Furthermore, a word accepts, enumerate, what a superordinate universal word has excluded, and then itself treats that as something to be excluded. Cherry tree directly excludes cedar, etc., exclusion 1, but indirectly, it also accepts and targets for exclusion whatever the superordinate universal word tree has excluded, exclusion 2, such as pot, etc. Dignāga explains, a particular term, cherry tree, also accepts other meanings, pot, etc., that the general term, tree, has excluded, exclusion 2, on its own subordinates, cherry tree, cedar, etc., because it desires them, PSV 5.25 Candelas. 61. This implies that cherry tree brings about not only the understanding that it is not a cedar, etc., but also a definite cognition that it is not a pot, etc. 62.
Tri l'exclusion de non tri, pot, etc.
Cherry tree exclusion 1 non-cherry tree, cedar, etc. Cherry tree. To rephrase this positively, the term cherry tree does not exclude the superordinate meaning tree and thus produces a definite cognition regarding tree. That is, the commonly observed linguistic phenomenon of determining superordinate meanings is explained by the fact that these meanings are not excluded. Non-exclusion of subordinate. On the other hand, regarding subordinate meanings, there is no definite cognition, but they are not excluded. For example, the term existent includes substance, quality, and motion, but it does not mean only substance. So, when existent is uttered, doubt arises as to whether it refers to a substance. Dignāga states, similarly, how can the general term, existent, not be neutral regarding its own proper meaning, existence, which is fixed to the intended meaning, substance, earthen thing, by a particular term, substance, or an even more particular term, earthen? PSV 5.25 Candelas. 63, that is, existent does not exclude substance as an enemy. Neither does it exclusively embrace, upadat, substance as an ally. It treats substance, quality, and motion equally, maintaining a neutral attitude, upkate.
Existe l'exclusion non existe.
Substance quality motion.
Dignāga states. Expecting that general meaning of tree, the subordinate meaning, ayap, is not abandoned by its own general term, tree. Nor is it embraced. This is because doubt arises. And in the case of synonyms, both words have the same meaning, PS 5.26, 64. Here, there is a contrast between abandoned, ujita, and embraced, upada. One either excludes an enemy or embraces an ally. Dignāga uses the expression to be neutral, upkate, to mean that it is neither of these two extremes. 3 types of non-exclusion. From the above, 3 types of non-exclusion can be stated regarding words: non-exclusion of proper meaning, definite cognition, non-exclusion of superordinate, definite cognition, and non-exclusion of subordinate, doubt. 65. Non-exclusion, anapaha. Non-exclusion of proper meaning, definite, tree. Non-exclusion of superordinate, definite, cherry tree. Non-exclusion of subordinate, doubt, existent substance, earthen thing. Contradiction. On the other hand, particular terms at the same level contradict each other and exclude each other's meanings. Cherry tree, along with cedar, etc., seeks tree, leading to mutual contradiction and excluding cedar, etc., 1. Similarly, tree, along with pot, etc., competes for earthen thing, leading to mutual contradiction and excluding pot, etc., 2. Therefore, indirectly, cherry tree also excludes pot, etc., 1 2. Earthen thing, equals exclusion of non-earthen thing. Tree equals exclusion of non-tree, 2 pot. Cherry tree exclusion of non-cherry 1 exclusion of non-cedar. Thus, there are 2 types of exclusion, one due to mutual contradiction and one due to indirect contradiction.
Non-contradiction, non-exclusion, détermination, n double.
Here, linguistic phenomena such as non-exclusion and exclusion are explained by the principles of non-contradiction and contradiction. Dignāga states this is, thus, because there is no contradiction, the exclusion of the meanings of general and other terms is not appropriate, PSV 5.25 Candelas, 66, and a particular term, however, excludes the meaning of another particular term, because of contradiction, PS 5.28 67, 68. Furthermore, doubt concerning the subordinate, as already mentioned, becomes the source of a definite understanding of existent pot through the expectation existent what, and its proximity to the other. Word pot. Non-contradiction, avarota, non-exclusion of meaning determination, doubt. Contradiction, virota, exclusion of other meanings. If we further pursue the basis for this, the basis must again be not having been seen. It is not that tree has never been seen used for cherry tree. Therefore, tree does not exclude cherry tree. Conversely, cherry tree has never been seen used for cedar. Therefore, cherry tree excludes cedar. Regarding the basis for cherry tree excluding cedar, Dignāga, replacing the view above that it is based on contradiction, states the view that it is based on not having been seen, explaining, or there is exclusion because of not having been seen, PS 5.31a, 69, and or, because a particular term is not seen in relation to the meaning of another particular term, it excludes it, PSV ad 31a, 70. Word meaning acquisition in the strong theory of denotation. If one stands by realism, admitting a direct relationship between a word and its meaning, and a strong sense of denotation, then the above linguistic phenomena cannot be explained. Dignāga addresses this problem by linking it to the context of word meaning acquisition, PSV 5.35. As we have already seen, there is a linguistic phenomenon where, if one says existent, doubt arises about subordinate things like substance, and conversely, if one says tree, definite cognition arises about superordinate things like earthen objects, substances, existence, and knowable objects. When explaining this with realism semantics instead of non-exclusion semantics, the problem lies in the method of word meaning acquisition. In realism, a positive relationship is established. That is, an experience like the word cow was seen in relation to a cow is presupposed through positive concomitants, and via. In that case, specifically, a situation can be imagined where the word tree was seen to apply to a cherry tree. If one recalls that relationship, then in the context of linguistic usage, cherry tree should be definitively recalled from tree. Word meaning acquisition linguistic usage. Cherry tree tree cherry tree tree. Relation to multiple entities and doubt. However, what actually occurs when one hears the word tree is doubt? Is it a cherry tree or a cedar? In response to this, one might argue that since the word tree has been seen in relation to not only cherry trees but also cedars, etc., there is doubt about cherry tree or cedar. However, if we think about it this way, when a relationship is seen with multiple entities, doubt will arise. In that case, since the word tree has been seen in relation to multiple things like earthen objects, then during linguistic usage, tree should produce not only doubt like is it a cherry tree or a cedar, but also doubt like is it an earthen object or a substance? Relation establishment and doubt/determination. The explanatory principles and linguistic phenomena here are negative concomitants, in conjunction with the determination of superordinates and the doubt concerning subordinates. That is, in the case of Apoha theory, a passive relation establishment, whose content is non-exclusion, is established solely by the accumulation of negative concomitants not having been seen, a counterexample, until now, Adarsana. As a result, the linguistic phenomena of determination and doubt can be explained. In other words, instead of actively selecting a word meaning and relating it to the word, all that remains after exclusion are generally available as word meaning candidates. To put it another way, selection is by elimination. On the other hand, in the case of positive concomitants, a strong sense of relation establishment holds, making it impossible to explain doubt and determination.
Négative concomitance non exclusion détermination, DOUB.
Positive concomitants relation establishment absence of determination, absence of doubt. Multiple properties. Dignāga critiques the realist's understanding of properties and substrata. According to realism, a single existent entity possesses numerous properties. For example, a pot has potness, earthenness, substanceness, and existence. A mango, similarly, has yellow, sweetness, and fragrance. Potness. Earthenness. Substanceness. Existence. Pot. How are specific properties extracted and recognized from these numerous coexisting properties? Dignāga argues that only the Apoha theory can explain this, while realism cannot. If realism posits many properties on the side of the object, it becomes necessary to establish existence, substanceness, potness, etc., on the object's side, corresponding to our cognitions of existent, substance, and pot. This creates a discrepancy between the first and second tiers, making it impossible to explain one-tiered expressions like existent equals substance. Alternatively, if one attempts to force the various properties down from the second tier to the first, problems of mutual contradiction or the cognition of a mixed color due to the intermingling of numerous properties arise. When many properties coexist, it becomes impossible to explain how only one property such as pot can be extracted and cognized, Kataoka 2017. On the other hand, the Apoha theory does not encounter such problems because exclusion itself is non-existent, adravya. Many exclusions can coexist on a pot, the exclusion of non-pot, the exclusion of non-earthen thing, the exclusion of non-substance, and so on. Since all of them are essentially non-existent, there is no concern about the problem of mixed habitation as in realism. Each exclusion can be extracted based on the difference in the object of exclusion. For instance, a pot is cognized by excluding non-pot, and an earthen thing is cognized by excluding non-earthen thing. Dignāga summarizes the possibility of extracting a single property as follows, PS 5.12. Although the denoted object, e.g., a tree, has many aspects, it is not understood from the word in all its aspects. Rather, it, the word, fulfills the purpose of exclusion according to the relation it, the word, itself has previously experienced with the object. The denoted object is understood from the word with a certain specific aspect as a certain thing. 71. The same idea is expressed as follows. A certain part of that existent is understood in the world through the exclusion of another meaning. 72. Conversely, in realism, as seen in the mixed color problem, all the properties present, that is, all aspects of the existent, would be understood. In contrast, in the Apoha theory, because the exclusion of others is non-existent, the extraction of a single aspect becomes possible through the difference in the object of exclusion. 3 possibilities of the universal possessor. In his critique of the universal possessor theory, Dignāga divides the possibilities of the universal possessor into 3, rejecting all of them, namely, the particular, the universal/relation, and the subordinate group, e.g., pot. Universal possessor equals particular, PS 5.8 candelas. Universal possessor equals universal possessor in general, Jatamanmatra, equals universal/relation, PS 5.9 ab. Universal possessor equals subordinate group, e.g., pot, PS 5.9 CD a 10a. If what existent refers to, i.e., that which possesses existence, is a specific particular, existent 1, existent 2, then the fault of the particular, already discussed, would apply. Furthermore, if the universal possessor in general, Jatamanmatra, is intended, it would refer to universal possessiveness. And that would be either a universal or a relation. For example, in the case of existent, if it is said to refer to that which possesses existence in general, its content can only be existence or a relation with existence. Universals and relations have already been rejected. Finally, there is the case of pot, etc. Dignāga seems to be referring not to individual particulars but to subordinate groups formed by their aggregation, e.g., among things possessing existence, those distinguished as pot, etc., from cloth, etc. Dignāga states, if the object that which possesses it is pot, etc., then it does not apply to cloth, etc. How can such an object be a commonality? PS 5.9 CD 10a, 73, if that which possesses existence is limited to pot, etc., then it does not apply to cloth, etc., and therefore cannot be a commonality that applies to both pot, etc., and cloth, etc. Existent existence.
Existe égale peau, etc.
Cloth, etc.
Exclusion possessor. Naturally, Dignāga must have considered the same 3 possibilities for the exclusion possessor, that is, whether the exclusion possessor is a particular, a universal/relation, or a subordinate group like pot, etc. However, curiously, he does not present a clear parallel discussion on what the exclusion possessor is. Consequently, Komarila retaliates against the exclusion possessor with the same arguments Dignāga directed at the universal possessor, via Apoha 128-132. This criticism from Komarila also indicates that Dignāga did not present a clear argument. As is evident from the critique of the pot, etc. case, for Dignāga, the exclusion possessor must be common to both pot, etc., and cloth, etc.
Existe l'exclusion non existe. Exclusion possessor. Peau, etc. Cloth, etc.
However, Dignāga's actual argument is not that the exclusion possessor is common, but that exclusion is common.
Existe l'exclusion non existe. Peau, etc. Cloth, etc.
If we align with Dignāga's own thought, we could justify his view as follows. The exclusion possessor, which is the proper meaning of existent, includes both cloth, etc., and pot, etc., without excluding them. Here again, the difference between strong and weak relation establishment comes into play. When establishing a positive relation, it becomes a specific relation, and thus not an unspecific, general inclusion. Therefore, the criticism that specifically asks what the universal possessor in general is, can be justified. On the other hand, specifically asking what the exclusion possessor in general is nonsensical. This is because it generally includes all that has not been excluded as a remainder. Exclusion as commonality. The exclusion of others, which is the word meaning, possesses the characteristic of being a commonality that applies to all particulars. This characteristic seems to be mindful of the third possibility of the universal possessor, namely the pot, etc. case. Dignāga refers to the fault there as the fault of non-commonality due to non-encompassment, avia packet vad asmnyadoa. Dignāga states. And there is no fault of non-commonality due to non-encompassment. 1. Because the exclusion of other meanings in general is non-distinct. 2. And because it is non-existent. For this very reason, there is no need to pursue a connection with another universal comparicular. 3. Because it directly negates other meanings, PSV 5.36c. 74. The first reason given here is because the exclusion of other meanings equals meanings of other words, in general is non-distinct, arthantarapahamatrejabanat that. Simply put, it means that Apoha is singular. The second reason is that Apoha is non-existent. Thus, two lines of justification are offered. Non-distinctness encompassment commonality. Non-existence encompassment commonality. Because it is non-distinct, the exclusion of non-existent is common to both pot, etc., and cloth, etc. When one directly excludes the other, non-existent, the remainder is grouped as that which is not non-existent. As seen in the discussion of existent including pot, pot was encompassed within the remainder that excluded others. In other words, the exclusion possessor is the remainder after excluding others, and it includes both pot, etc., and cloth, etc. 75.
Existe l'exclusion, non distinct non existe, non existe.
Exclusion possessor in general. Pot, etc. Cloth, etc.
When he says there is a fault of non-commonality because it is non-encompassing, avia packet vat asmnyadoa, he must also intend it is common because it is encompassing, via packet vat samanayam. And since the term encompassing here seems to be a choice of words mindful of existent encompassing pot, etc., then thinking in parallel, it must be mindful of exclusion encompassing pot, etc., and cloth, etc. This is based on exclusion being non-distinct. Here, we can distinguish between strong commonality and weak commonality. Strong commonality refers to a universal that inheres in multiple entities. Weak commonality, on the other hand, is a commonality in the sense of being passively non-distinct, rather than actively inhering in multiple entities. For realists, existence inheres, so existence is common to both pot and cloth. This means both pot and cloth are cognized as existent. For Apoha theorists, however, pot and cloth are understood as existent in the sense of not being non-existent, not because they share existence. Strong commonality, the inherence of a commonality is X. Weak commonality, the sharing of not being non-X. Because it is non-existent, as already seen, existent can encompass pot because exclusion is non-existent, and thus existent has directness toward its proper meaning, existent. When Dignāga provides because it is non-existent as a justification for encompassment, he must have this in mind. Non-existence, adravayatva. Direct function, t. Encompassment, vyapakatva. Commonality, samanya. Existence, dravyatva. Dependence on others, asvatantratva. Non-encompassment, avyapakatva. Non-commonality, asamanya. Conversely, for Dignāga, if something is existent, it becomes indirect and leads to dependence on others, and therefore does not possess encompassment. Because it directly negates other meanings. From the above, it becomes clear that exclusion plays the role of a weak commonality in the sense of non-distinctness. This eliminates the need to posit a commonality separate from exclusion. In other words, exclusion alone suffices for the purpose of commonality. Dignāga states this as, there is no need to pursue a connection with another universal comparicular. And as the basis for this, he states, because it directly negates other meanings. By directly negating or excluding other meanings, such as not non-existent, the remaining things are grouped. That is, by negating others, the remainder is grouped, and thus exclusion plays the role of commonality. This statement is mindful of Dignāga's meaning of commonality as a weak commonality, namely non-distinctness, as in not being non-X. Exclusion of others' weak commonality, non-distinctness. Singularity and encompassment. As we have confirmed, singularity, ekatva, or non-distinctness, abhita, leads to the possibility of relation establishment and non-deviation, which in turn enable determination and denotation. In addition, there is a non-distinctness, abhinatva, in the sense of being common, samanya. Dignāga calls this encompassment, vyapokatva. Just as the universal in the universal possessor theory was singular in common, so too was the exclusion in the exclusion possessor theory singular in common. Both are merely different ways of grasping the same thing and can be considered almost synonymous. However, diagrammed according to Dignāga's own causal relationship, it appears as follows. Non-distinctness, abhinatva, encompassment, vyapokatva, commonality, samanya. Conversely, the universal possessor when referring to pot, etc., has the fault of being non-common because it is non-encompassing. Distinctness, binatva, non-encompassment, avyapokatva, non-commonality, asamanya. As we have seen, if what the word existent refers to is a pot, etc., possessing existence, then it does not apply to cloth, etc. Thus, the meaning of existent, namely, a pot, etc., possessing existence, would not include cloth, etc. Such a thing cannot be called a commonality, samanya, which is something that applies to multiple entities, anakathi. The term encompassment reminds us of the argument that existent does not encompass pot. There is also the argument that a universal does not include particulars. It was said that a particular is included in a universal, but that is not proper. Why? Because there is doubt, PS 5.18b. Doubt is observed for particulars from a general term. And it is not proper for something to be denoted by that which causes doubt. On the other hand, indirectly, the understanding of a universal from a particular term is possible due to non-deviation, 76. As we have seen, even if existent thing is understood from existent via existence, doubt arises as to whether it is a pot or cloth. This is because in realism existent does not encompass pot, or in other words, because existence does not include pot. That is, pot, which is a particular, is not included, and tarbhava, in existence, which is a commonality. In realism, the non-existent is always understood indirectly from the existent, understood through existence, and is not directly excluded. That is, it takes the step of, because it is an existent thing, it is not non-existent. Conversely, if the non-existent is directly excluded as in the Apoha theory, then pot is included in exclusion, which is a commonality, that is, it is not excluded.
Qualification or qualifier-qualificant relation.
While the context of discussing identical reference often involves combinations of superordinate and subordinate words, or even more subordinate words, like existent substance or existent pot, the context of discussing qualification uses examples like blue water lily. 77. Here, along with the sharing of identical reference, a bidirectional qualification relation is observed, where blue qualifies water lily and, conversely, water lily qualifies blue, simply referred to as qualification relation. 78. Dignāga extensively addresses qualification relations as an important linguistic phenomenon to be explained, PS 5.14, 25 ob. This section of the Sanskrit text still has many gaps, making it difficult to follow every detail of the argument. Below, I will briefly explain Dignāga's main point. As already confirmed in the example of existent pot, when there is doubt, one arrives at definite knowledge through expectation. Dignāga cites the examples of uprightness and crow's nest, PSV 5.14, 79, when only the commonality of uprightness of an upright object is vaguely perceived in the dark, a person experiences doubt, is it a human or a pillar? Also, if a crow's nest is seen alone, doubt arises as to its location, i.e., whether it is on a pillar or on the ground. Thus, uprightness and a crow's nest, when alone, are causes of doubt. However, when these two causes of doubt combine, and a crow's nest is confirmed on an upright object, definite knowledge arises that the upright object is a pillar, not a human, and that the crow's nest is on a pillar, not on the ground. That is, things that individually cause doubt bring about definite knowledge when they are combined. Uprightness crow's nest. Human pillar ground. Similarly, blue and water lily, when alone, cause doubt. However, by combining, they bring about definite knowledge of blue water lily. This explains the qualification relation and the coreference between blue and water lily. Blue water lily ness water lily. Blue heron blue water lily red water lily. The universal possessor theory cannot explain this qualification relation. As already stated, blue does not encompass blue heron or blue water lily because it is mediated by blue, PSV 5.18a. Conversely, in the Apoha theory, because exclusion is non-existent, it does not possess mediacy. Therefore, both blue heron and blue water lily remain as not non-blue, and thus are encompassed by blue. Consequently, as previously stated, in the universal possessor theory, blue and water lily ness can only be related through indirect implication. Therefore, since a direct relationship between blue and water liliness cannot be established, the qualifier-qualificand relation between blue and water liliness cannot be established within the scope of word meaning, PSV 5.19 ABC. Conclusion. How can a theory of word meaning be constructed without admitting universals? This was the challenge facing Dignāga. If someone is told bring the cow, they understand cow from the word and actually bring a particular cow. As a theory to explain this reality, Buddhism had to present some kind of theory. In addressing semantics, Dignāga was constrained by both epistemology and ontology. That is, as a cognition, word meaning understanding is reduced to inference. And as an existent, word meaning had to be positioned as a non-existent, which is different from absolute non-existence, as a common characteristic, i.e., a conceptual construct, that is the object of conceptual cognition. As the content of the common characteristic understood from words, Dignāga considered the exclusion of others. The idea that the meaning of a word is its distinctness, beta, which is an exclusion from others, attributed to vi, is seen even in the context of compound words. Rajapurava, in the Mabya, 80, Barthari also refers to particular terms that denote an excluded meaning. 81, that is, the idea that a word denotes what has been excluded is already clearly seen in Barthari. Dignāga, who did not want to admit word meanings as positive existence subject to conceptual cognition, utilized this idea. According to this, word meaning becomes the exclusion of others, i.e., the non-existence of non-X. That is, what is understood from cow is the exclusion of non-cow. This is consistent with his view of existence. That is, reality internally contains various aspects on, or within, it. The common characteristic does not exist by itself, rather, it emerges through the exclusion of others, in accordance with the previously established relation. Furthermore, Dignāga advanced the exclusion possessor theory as his own, against the strongest opposing theory, the universal possessor theory. That is, he defined the proper meaning of cow as that which is qualified by the exclusion of non-cow in general. And based on weak relation establishment, which is the acquisition of pervasion relations/word meaning relations through negative concomitants based on not having been seen until now, he arrived at the idea of weak denotation, whose content is non-exclusion. This easily explains appositional expressions like existent pot. It also explains how superordinate meanings like earthen thing and substance can be definitively understood from tree. None of these can be explained by realism, which admits strong denotation based on strong relation establishment. Unlike the universal possessor theory, the exclusion possessor theory gains an advantage by explaining relation establishment and denotation through negative concomitants. Furthermore, there is an ontological difference between them. While universals are existence/realities, exclusion is a non-existence/non-reality. While universals, by mediating as existence, make the word meaning of the universal possessor indirect or secondary, figurative, exclusion, being non-existent, does not possess mediacy, and thus does not hinder the primacy of the word meaning, where the word directly denotes its meaning. The ontological difference in character works in favor of the exclusion theory. Dignāga does not admit real universals. However, Katsura, 1979, clearly shows that when depicting the world of discourse, he presupposed the Vaika hierarchy of universals. So, did Dignāga groundlessly presuppose the Vaika hierarchy of common characteristics as a socially given, fixed entity? Ontologically, one could indeed say so. According to universal realism, colorness does not inhere in taste, etc., but only in blue, yellow, etc. That is, worldly linguistic usage has a strong ontological basis. On the other hand, Apoha theory lacks such an ontological basis. That is, there is no ontological reason why the exclusion of non-color, i.e., the exclusion of taste, etc., exists as a commonality of subordinate meanings like blue or yellow, or why it is treated as such in the world. In response to such a question, PSV 5.37a, Dignāga states, there is no other option but to follow the world. As seen here, Dignāga's fundamental attitude towards language is, we too follow worldly linguistic conventions, just as the world does. PSV 5.37b, Asmabir API Lokaviavar, Lokavadi Vanugamayant, 82. However, he did not fail to delve into the basis for the hierarchical structure of common characteristics, Apoha, formed by encompassment relations. This is because he essentially presents an epistemological basis for non-exclusion/encompassment as not having been unseen, footnote 69. Furthermore, while generally adhering to worldly conventions, he substantially made statements about the ontological basis of the hierarchy. He describes a relationship where subordinate words compete for superordinate word meanings with antagonistic relations, like princes vying for a throne, PSV 5.28 of Rajaputravat, footnote 67, 83, an explanation of hierarchical structure based on contradiction would not have been necessary for a theory that merely follows worldly hierarchy. Also, if one starts from a well-known worldly hierarchy, a given pervasion relation between socially agreed upon common characteristics would provide a superordinate coordinate subordinate order. Once the process of relating to proper meaning is complete, the definite understanding of superordinate concepts and doubt regarding subordinate concepts should have been explained as arising in a chain, based on pervasion relations between objects, e.g., I app is necessarily a tree, etc. However, this would allow the universal possessor theory to similarly counter with pervasion relations between universals. 84. Dignāga's description delves into the epistemological basis of pervasion relations between objects. Furthermore, even necessary relations like pervasion, from Dignāga's perspective, being relations, must presuppose relation establishment by the learner. Dignāga did not envision an ontological grounding through unique characteristics like tarmakirti. The basis is the grasping of pervasion. Strictly speaking, since Buddhism posits impermanent relations, it is an active act of relation establishment rather than the discovery of given relations. The decisive difference from the universal possessor theory is that the method of grasping relations, whether pervasion between objects or relations between words and objects, is negative concomitance, not positive concomitance. Therefore, therein must lie the key to the superiority of the two theories. His idea of non-exclusion as the essence of denotation suggests that non-exclusion traces back to relation establishment. The basis for negative concomitance that Dignāga himself states is the absence of experience, adarsana. Tree has not been seen in relation to pot, non-tree. On the other hand, it is not that it has not been seen in relation to cherry tree. Therefore, cherry tree is not excluded as the word meaning of tree. That is, it is encompassed. So, how are the intermingled superordinate, coordinate, and subordinate concepts ordered under the desired hierarchy? This is where the mechanisms of contradiction/non-contradiction and exclusion/non-exclusion come into play. Thus, Dignāga's description first incorporates the related word meanings of superordinate, coordinate, and subordinate through non-exclusion/encompassment, and then organizes them a posteriori. He does not proceed with the description by presupposing a hierarchy from the beginning. Kumarila discusses contradiction, viroda, an ontological basis, and not having been seen, adatha, an epistemological basis, as reasons why cherry tree excludes cedar. He further discusses expectation, ka, a word meaning related basis, as the reason why tree does not abandon the subordinate meanings, such as cherry tree and cedar. That is, he considers Dignāga's three bases for exclusion/non-exclusion and systematically rejects them. 85. This organized critique by Kumarila also confirms that Dignāga delved into the bases of exclusion/non-exclusion. I recall Professor Akihiko Akamatsu, who was preparing a Japanese translation of the Vakyapadya and giving intensive lectures at the University of Tokyo in July 1995. He mused, is it really okay to simply accept the Vaika hierarchy? He must have felt a certain unease about the hierarchy of universals so brilliantly depicted by Katsura, 1979. At that time, Professor Akamatsu kindly asked the students if they needed a copy of his doctoral dissertation submitted to the University of Paris III. Having little, or no, interest in Apoha theory, and considering it was in French, I did not ask for it. It was a missed opportunity. I should have gratefully accepted it. At that time, I never dreamed that I would later research Apoha theory. It has taken until Professor Akamatsu's retirement year, March 2018, but with this paper, I would like to offer my own answer to that question.